I'm Sandy. I lost my dad on April 25th, 2011. When I got the news, it was a little different maybe than some people. I was at work, and my parents' neighbor called me, and I just saw caller ID, so I saw the area code, and I'm like, this is not a number I know, but I better answer this. And he told me that my dad had shot himself. And when people ask me to talk about this, I'm so reluctant, and only because I feel like somehow it's my dad's story. But I realize the reason I'm reluctant is because I don't want people who didn't know him to define him by this. This was not my dad. My dad was the person who took care of us all. So my first question was, is he dead? My second question was, where's my mother? Is she okay? And this guy wanted to keep talking, and I said, I've got to go, because I had a 2-hour drive to get there. So I knew I had things to do. And so I kind of went into that hyper, I've got to take care of this now. I need to get there. I need to make sure my mom is okay. Then I need to take the steps to make sure we do what it is we need to do. So, I've heard a lot of people say that they got that call and immediately emotion overcame them. That didn't happen to me. In fact, I was in my office, and the people that worked for me were just, aghast. And they said, oh, sit down. What can we do for you? And I sat down and I said, I need to get hold of my husband. I need to get out of here. I have things to do. So the emotion didn't hit me for a few hours. It was, like I said, it was kind of going into that hyper, my dad is gone. It's up to me now to take care of things. The emotion hit a little later. As I was on my way home to throw some things in a suitcase, I had to call my sister because she lives a couple of states away, so it wasn't like we could get her to get home as quickly as I could. And so I was talking to her like I'm talking to you. She was on the other side of the phone literally screaming. And so I had, I just felt like, okay, I have to remain calm because, again, I have things to do. And so I just kept talking to her and talked her through it and told her, I was on my way home to, I would get to Mom when we got there, then we would call. And so again, businesslike. I remember then getting home, and my mother has fabulous neighbors, and she was with one of the neighbors, and so we went there. And the emotion hit me the first time several hours after we had been at my mom and dad's house, and a friend of my mom's came to talk to her, and so I know she was ensconced in the living room talking, and Jamie, my husband, bless him, was on the phone calling my dad's brothers, and I had this minute, and I literally physically collapsed, and just, it was overwhelming. And then it was like, okay, Sandy, get it together. You got things to do. You got things to do. You got people to take care of. So, because I kept hearing my dad in my head, just take care of your mom. He was telling us that for several months. You get these warning signs that you don't realize are really, truly warning signs. And for several months, he had said, when he was having issues, don't worry about me. You just take care of your mom. No matter what happens to me, you just take care of your mom. So I heard him that day in my head, just saying, just take care of your mom. So the emotion was odd. Like I said, I collapsed, but then I got up and I thought, you've got to deal with this. But when I would have moments of thinking about what had just happened and trying to wrap my head around it, again, I went back to who he was, and I'd had some medical tests a few days before that, and I kept saying, no, he wouldn't do this because he didn't know I was okay. We got to the point where we didn't always tell him things that were going on because he would worry too much. So it was like, okay, I know I remember sitting and saying out loud, Dad, you didn't know that the test hadn't come back yet. You don't know that I'm okay. You couldn't have walked away at this point. So that, so it was just again, kind of that disbelief, I guess. The next time emotion hit was going to the funeral and walking into the funeral home, and I couldn't walk in. I couldn't walk in, and it took some coaxing to get me to walk in there. So I started reading a lot, and that made me feel a little better, because I sensed, okay, I'm feeling this and this is weird, but then I would find, no, a lot of people have felt this. I remember, like, the first week afterwards, trying to understand how I was feeling, and I realized, as cliche as it sounds, my heart was broken. People use that phrase, I'm brokenhearted, and I thought, I know what this means. I know what this means. And almost 4 years later, it's still, you think you're mended and something can happen. And it rips it open again. And one night, and I think it took about 8 months, I got up in the middle of the night and I literally ran into the wall just because I didn't turn on a light. And I ran into the wall and I crumpled to the wall, and my husband was like, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, I hurt myself and I'm just sad." And that's when I realized that, okay, I need to figure out, the sadness is always going to be there, but I've got to figure out how not to have it so overwhelming. And so I don't know if I would call it seeing hope, but I decided I really had to go talk to somebody. I mean, I had a lot of good friends, and my husband was wonderful, listening and all, but I needed to talk to somebody that was going to be objective. Number one, to tell me I wasn't crazy, quite frankly, to say, this is pretty normal based on what you lost and the way you lost him. So once I went and I talked to a counselor, and I talked to her for a few months, not a long time, but just enough to get a little grounded. And once I felt like I had my feet on the ground again, I think that sense of hope returned, because it's just knowing, there was just this acceptance. As I said, the suicide part is so hard when you think of the way he left. And again, I've never been angry with him. I've never blamed him. I never would, because all it is to me is like, oh my God, Daddy, you were hurting so badly, and I listened to you, but I never thought you would do this. But I lost him, and in the grand scheme of things, that's all that matters. He's not there. When I go back home, I sit in his chair to make it feel like he's hugging me. The first Thanksgiving, I sat in his chair at dinner because it was just too painful to see the empty seat. Again, being almost 4 years out, there's hope, just because we survived this, and he's still there. I get signs from him on occasion that he's there. He's watching. He's still looking out for me. What was most helpful to me, honestly, was my own research. The hard part, I think, about grief generally is nobody wants to talk about it. I went back to work, and there were honestly days I felt, did this really happen? Because nobody's saying anything. And so you combine grief generally with a loss to suicide, and literally there were days I felt like I am going crazy, because nobody's acknowledging this. So I don't mean to sound like people weren't supportive. It's just that I think, there's this fear of, I'll say the wrong thing, so I won't say anything, and so it's very isolating. You said grief generally is isolating. Grief based on a suicide loss is 10 times as isolating. And so what ended up helping me most was, again, sort of, as I could, reading about grief. I tried, honestly, to read early on. Somebody had given me a book about suicide, and I rarely put down a book, but this one I had to, because it was too hard. And but the grief stuff again, it was helpful. I found a wonderful book on daily readings on grief that actually I just picked up again. Um, and it does. It's just kind of like every once, at least having every once in a while you're reading something going, okay, I'm not crazy, or I'm not alone. I'm not alone. It wasn't even crazy. It was just like, I'm not alone. That helped me the most. If if I came upon somebody who was newly bereaved because of suicide, and actually I have done this, honestly, the first thing I do would hug them. Um, I was at an event a couple of months ago, and there were two sisters who had just lost their dad weeks before. And that was the first thing I had to do. And simply because it's just, again, it's such an isolating feeling that you just want people to know you're not alone. And what I explained to them was just that. Please know that you're not alone. Please know that there really are a lot of us out there. Unfortunately, we all belong to this club that nobody ever wanted to belong to. And there are a lot of us who are here for each other. I tell people outright that I went to a counselor. A lot of people like to go to group therapy. That's not my thing. But I know a lot of people have said that's really helpful, so I relay that to them. I have gotten involved in a couple of volunteer activities that deal with suicide, so I feel like I've got some more resources that I can give to them. But aside from literally being able to hand them, gee, here's a number to call, that kind of thing, I think it's, again, telling them whatever you're feeling is okay. Because that's the first thing people have to understand, right? I mean, like I said, I never felt anger, but a lot of people do, and that's okay. Because this is a different kind of loss. This is, again, rip your heart out kind of loss. But if we can all understand that it's really not a lot different than somebody dying from cancer. It is unfortunately a cause of death that comes from mental illness. And if people can understand that and first of all, as weird as it sounds, you kind of have to say it's not personal. It's not personal. It wasn't about me. I knew that the first day. It wasn't about me. I knew, though, based on what my father had said to my mom, he honestly thought, in his mind, he was doing what was best for us. He thought he was becoming a burden. He had some health issues. He thought, if I let this go on and have to be hospitalized, it's going to be a burden on my family, so it's better for me to take care of this. So it wasn't ever about me, other than he loved me, and his way at that point in his mind was, this is how I will continue to take care of my family. So don't take it personally. It's not about you. It was about that person and the pain that they were feeling. And in their mind, thinking that this is the best solution. So I would give people that advice. Don't take it personally, but understand that you're working through that loss, and feel what you're going to feel, and don't deny the feelings. Don't push them down. Don't not feel them, because if there's one thing about grief, it's going to be there until you deal with it. So it'll wait for you. If you don't want to feel it for 3 years, that's okay, because in 3 years it's going to come up and bite you. So the only way to get through it is go through it, and that's my best advice to people. Don't deny the grief, because you can't.